human beings live in antagonism to nature and that we're actually a malevolent force, and that our social structures, which are clearly capable of the commission of atrocity, are fundamentally oppressive, patriarchal in their nature. And so then if you're a male in a society with that ethos, the motive force that drives you into the world to live is associated with rapaciousness and despoliation on the natural front, and then oppression and atrocity on the social front. It's like, well then, if you're the least bit conscientious, because this sort of accusation hurts conscientious young men the most, then the best you can do is, well, let's say castrate yourself. How would that be? And that would be real comical, except that it's also happening.
Jordan Peterson mixes no words when it comes to the crisis of masculinity in our ultra-woke world. We're going to see not only what's really behind this crisis, but also how it reveals every crisis we're facing today and what we can do to stop it. Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, your Patriot Professor, here to help you stay sane in these insane times. So make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button, and let's dive right in.
Because of family fragmentation, there's a very large number of women who have, just like there's a very large number of men who have never had a real word of encouragement in their whole life. It's a really sad thing to see. It's a really, really sad thing to see that deeply, and to have seen that reflected in so many thousands of people. But there are many women who've never had a positive relationship with anyone male in their life. And so one of the consequences of that, we know, for example, that younger women are more likely to be attracted to men who show dark triad traits, narcissistic, Machiavellian, and psychopathic. And people who have those traits are characterized by the mimicry of competence. And so what women want in men more than anything else is competent generosity, and the data on that are very clear. But you can mimic that if you're narcissistic, and if you're a young woman, you can be deluded by that. It's partly because it points to the problem of dissociating competent confidence from the expression of power per se. So we could call power, I'll define that as the willingness and ability to use compulsion to attain your aims. Now, if you are someone who has a proclivity to manifest power, then that looks like the manifestation of both ambition and will. And if you haven't had a positive relationship with anyone masculine in your life, and maybe not even with your own internal masculinity, say, you can't discriminate between power and the ambition that serves competence. And so because that's terrifying, because the power, if you have had only negative relationships with men, their capability to use power becomes such a threat that it has to be opposed at all costs, even if it manifests itself within the developmental pathway of your own son.
That was a fascinating analysis. The key to what Peterson just said there is that because of the breakdown of the family in modern society, that's key, women have found it increasingly difficult to disassociate confident competence from pure raw power. And this is largely, as he pointed out, because women, according to the data, are very attracted to competent men. But young women tend to be attracted to more narcissistic men, and narcissists are very good at mimicking competence. So without a healthy relationship with men from the very beginning, which has been frustrated because of the breakdown of the family and absentee fathers and the like, women over the last few decades, they've found it harder and harder to disassociate competence from raw narcissistic power. And as power is deemed as a threat, it must be opposed at all costs, even when it comes to their own sons. This, for Peterson, is what's behind the crisis of masculinity.
That's definitely part of it. You know, there's an ideological drum that's being beaten constantly, both on the sociological constructivist front, right? That's the oppressive patriarchy, and then on the environmental front. And then you add to that the fact that, well, on the leftists, especially the radical types, their whole damn doctrine, it's the most pathological doctrine you could invent if you set out to invent a pathological doctrine. And I mean that. I'm not making a joke. I really mean that in the deepest possible sense. The notion that The fundamental human motivation is the willingness and ability to use compulsion, power. Power. It's all about power. And every time I hear that now from someone, I think, that is not a sociological observation. That is a confession on your part. And it's also just complete bloody nonsense. I mean, you all know this. You have friends because they're compelled to be your friends? Like, that's definitely not how you have friends. You might have bully henchmen that way, but you don't have friends. Power is an extraordinarily unstable basis to establish a marriage on. Plus, it just doesn't work because it turns out that women who are so annoying are very difficult to oppress, you know. So you can try, but it's not that easy. And I don't think that we've been all that historically successful in doing so. But it's also a preposterous proposition because the expression of power within an intimate relationship does not produce intimacy or a relationship. The best it can produce is like a combination of tyranny and slavery, and that does not characterize the institution of marriage per se. So there is this insistence among the radicals that power is the fundamental motivation, and then you think too, okay, you're only motivated by power. That means that we can only get along if our interests align, because if you're motivated by power and I'm motivated by power and our interests don't align, and there's nothing else but power, then the only option I have is to turn you into an enemy and try to destroy you, because we can't engage in dialogue. That's dialogos. And the reason we can't engage in dialogue is because there's no logos. There's just power.
Now, this is why I love Peterson so much. I love how he reveals the crisis of our age through the crisis of masculinity. In other words, the crisis of masculinity is not a thing in our society. Instead, it's a revelation of what our society has become. Our masculinity crisis is a cultural and social crisis. In many ways, it all goes back to this thing we commonly refer to as cultural Marxism, which can be traced back to an academic movement known as the Frankfurt School, which itself was a group of European academics who eventually came over to the States to escape Hitler back in the 30s and 40s. And at the heart of their ridiculously simplistic notion of how the world works is that the world is ultimately made up of only two groups of people: oppressors and the oppressed, victims and victimizers. And so the operative principle in all social interaction is the principle of power. And so in order for the oppressed to prevail, they must literally emasculate power all throughout society, which, of course, ironically, simply entails the transfer of power away from one group and into the hands of another. And they now, the formerly oppressed, they now are by definition the oppressor, the wielder of power. So this is what's so profound about Jordan Peterson's analysis. Men are being deliberately emasculated, feminized, weakened, so as to render them subservient to a new oppressor class, something akin to Marx's concept of the tyranny of the proletariat. Now do you see why men who work out, men who've decided to get back into shape and lift weights and build muscle, are all now considered to be far right? This isn't a joke. MSNBC was responding to a new workout craze among men. Men are more and more rejecting this absurd crisis of masculinity that's been imposed upon them to make them weak. And they're starting to work out again, get strong, have a powerfully positive masculine image. And woke leftists label that proactive health consciousness as far right. And that's because it is, given their worldview. Strong men are a threat to the political power that is amassed as a result of the weakening of men. Now, unfortunately for these far leftists, the cat's already out of the bag. More and more men are fighting back against this deliberate demasculation by getting into shape. Some are giving up alcohol. They're hitting the gym again. As you know, we've had a number of guests on our channel who are experts in health and fitness precisely in order to help facilitate this. I've been going through this. As many of you know, I lost 60 pounds over the last year and a half. I started exercising. I started weight training. I've even started taking this turkesterone. Are you guys familiar with that? A lot of men are starting to absolutely swear by this thing. It's called turkesterone. They swear by it just in terms of its help with muscle growth and strength building and how it improves recovery after workout. how it boosts testosterone. So I got into that. And I've been using our sponsor, Black Forest, their testosterone. Gang, I'm serious when I say it is freaking awesome. I mean, it's cheaper. They're cleaner. They don't put a bunch of other crap in their capsules. It's akin to the NMN that I take from Black Forest. I feel strong. I feel quicker recovery from my workouts. It's amazing stuff. And because they're patrons and sponsors of this channel, they're actually offering our whole audience a huge discount. They're offering an amazing buy two, get one free offer just for our audience, and it's just for the next 48 hours. So don't wait to take advantage of this special. Click on the link below to try it out yourself. You're going to absolutely love it. So what is Jordan Peterson's solution to this masculinity crisis?
What the antithesis to power is, or to the will to power, let's say, in terms of arbitrary compulsion. And it's something like the spirit of free and voluntary play. And that's a wonderful thing to know. It's so optimistic. You guys were talking about optimism earlier, you know. So imagine this, is that if you structure your relations optimally, and I mean optimally, with yourself, with your intimate partner, with your family, with your community, the highest level of attainment of that structuring is the manifestation of the spirit of voluntary play. And that's so lovely because there's nothing better than playing, fundamentally. And, you know, human beings and other mammals as well also have a biological circuit that mediates play. That was discovered by a man named Jaak Panksepp, and he showed that play is unbelievably important to the development of children for a variety of complicated reasons, partly because they're practicing to be competent adults, but also that it can be suppressed by almost any other emotion or motivation. So your kids can't really play if they're hungry or tired or wet or upset. The same would apply within your relationship. If there's stresses and tensions, the play disappears. But if you optimize the relationship and the circumstance, then the spirit of play can manifest itself. And I would also say that's also the fundamental purpose of fathers in some sense, is to imagine that paradise, that's a walled garden. That's what paradise means. So it's walls, structure, and then the garden inside is nature, and a nature that's tended. The masculine role in child rearing is something like the erection of the walls so that play can manifest itself within the walls. And that's a real good combination of security, because that's what the walls are for, but then the kind of freedom that allows for untrammeled development to occur in the most positive possible sense. And so I would say that those of us who are standing against the radicals who insist that the only human motivation is power can oppose that in part by putting forward the observation that the proper antithesis to that is the spirit of voluntary play.
What Peterson just said there reminds me of something the 20th century English essayist G.K. Chesterton once said. The more I considered Christianity, the more I found that while it had established a rule and order, the chief aim of that order was to give room for good things to run wild. In other words, authority, true authority, is not the manifestation of pure raw power. It's not there to oppress or to stifle. It's the exact opposite. The rules are there to awaken our humanity so as to allow good things to run wild. Strong men governed by God enable society to flourish. I thank God for Jordan Peterson. He's a voice of sanity in the midst of these insane times.